Yesterday I talked about Chris, but today we're looking at Gaster, the man who speaks in hands, the brilliant royal scientist, and the one who just might be the Roaring Knight. In my last video I went through some of the evidence and counter-arguments for the theory that Chris is a knight. And while I still think that they're a credible candidate for that title, someone else who fits the role pretty well is the royal scientist from Undertale, Gaster. Now, I know how a lot of people like to meme about Undertale and Deltarune fans slapping Gaster onto every mystery, like he's a deus ex machina that explains away anything we can't solve when theorizing. However, I really do think that there's plenty of evidence that not only connects him to Deltarune, but that also makes it clear that Toby had always intended for Gaster to be the one to connect the Undertale and Deltarune universes. Let's start at the beginning. What evidence even is there that Gaster is in Deltarune? While we see many of the same faces from Undertale, Gaster doesn't appear and is never even mentioned. Well, the connections actually start as early as 2015, right after the release of Undertale. Back then, Toby had already created the Deltarune.com website, which contained hidden messages for fans to find. In an archive of the website from August 2016, there's an image with hidden Wingdings texts, and an earlier archive of the image itself from December 2015 shows a different hidden message. The first image reads, "This next experiment seems very, very interesting," which is a line that we know Gaster says. And in 2016 we see that Toby updated the text to say, "3 heroes appeared to banish the angel's heaven." Without even playing Deltarune, we can also find more reference to Gaster hidden within the code of the game. There's some placeholder text that's apparently used to prevent errors, and some of the lines appear to be referencing the mystery man from Undertale, whom nearly everyone agrees is probably Gaster. The lines read, "Is that a cut on your face or part of your eye? You can't read these symbols, or maybe it's the handwriting. The gash weaves down as if you cry." The first and third lines are clearly referencing the scar on Mystery Man's face, while the second could be referring to Wingding's text, although it could also be a reference to the secret room we see behind Sans and Papyrus' house, where we find a note with text which we can't read. Going into the game, we also see other connections to the royal scientist. If we try to name the vessel Gaster, the game resets, and if we name ourselves Gaster, the game crashes. We get some other Easter eggs depending on what we name ourselves or the vessel, but this is the only name we can't use. In fact, if we start by playing Chapter 2, we don't get the same Easter eggs when using most of the character names, and the only one that actually has a unique effect is Gaster. If he really wasn't relevant at all to the plot, that would be a very weird decision by Toby. We can use the name of any other character, so why is Gaster the only one that's forbidden? We also see a connection to Gaster specifically in the Dark World. If we use our cell phone there, we hear an audio called musesmile.ogg, which in Undertale only plays in room 264, aka room Gaster. The rumbling we hear when walking near the mysterious door in the outskirts of the town is the same sound, just slowed down by 666%. Maybe that room is also somehow connected to Gaster, but considering how distorted the sound is, it could also just be Toby reusing the asset to sound like some kind of generator. It's also worth remembering that Gaster seems to speak in all caps, and the character who announced Deltarune in 2018 was also writing in all caps, and they even used some of the same phrases that we've seen Gaster use before, on Undertale's Twitter no less. The person who guides us through the creation of the vessel also speaks in all caps and split their sentences into multiple lines, just like we've seen Gaster and the person on Undertale's Twitter do. Towards the end of this opening sequence, when the vessel is discarded, the speech pattern does change and they stop using all caps. But as others have already argued, this is likely because while the first speaker was Gaster, the second person speaks more like Kara, whereas I already explained in my previous video, the Deltarune equivalent of them, the soulless Chris. To see another piece of evidence, we have to go back to Undertale, specifically to the room 264 that I mentioned before. In it, we see the infamous entry number 17, where Gaster talks about some mysterious experiment he's conducting, and this actually gives us some information that could help connect the Undertale and Deltarune universes. Whatever Gaster is experimenting with isn't something that just removes light. If that were the case, the photon readings would just be 0. No, this is something that creates darkness, just like the dark fountains we see in Deltarune. This also tells us that Gaster is being helped by 2 monsters, and I believe that we are playing as one of his assistants, hence why we start the game with what looks like Gaster guiding us through a character creation sequence, as we're currently connected to his experiment or machine in some way, and this would also explain why we can't use his name, since Gaster would already surely be using it himself. In Undertale, we're told by the Gaster followers that the royal scientist disappeared a long time ago, that he was scattered across time and space after falling into his creation, so we know that his experiment involved creating darkness and meddling with time and space. This, along with the way he spoke about Deltarune and those hidden wing beings, and on Twitter, and how he spoke about being connected to us and the soul, leads me to believe that Gaster's experiment is what connected the Undertale and Deltarune universes by creating the fountains. Really, there is no reason to think that his experiments affected only Undertale's time and space. If anything, considering everything I just explained, we have plenty of reason to think otherwise. My overarching theory is that Gaster was experimenting with some way to manipulate time and space to free the monsters from the underground, and that in Deltarune we're playing as one of Gaster's assistants, who somehow got connected to Chris in this universe, and either Gaster himself or his other assistant is the infamous Knight. This would also explain why Chris seems to be uniquely connected to the fountains, as I mentioned in my previous video. Since they're connected to us, they are also connected to whatever Gaster's experiments and the fountains are. This theory also helps explain another weird aspect of the Deltarune narrative. Did nobody discover a dark world until now? In the tens of thousands of years that humanity and monster kind have been around, did no one just stab the ground? Did no other dark worlds exist before the one in the supply closet? Ralza even describes how Lightners and Darkners used to live together, but we're given no indication that the existence of dark worlds is common knowledge. Undyne even makes fun of us if we tell her about it. And even if that is the first dark world that was created, why did no one else in this school see it until now when they went to look in the supply closet? All of this would be explained if dark worlds, their magic, and a way of creating them simply didn't exist until recently, when Gaster connected the Undertale and Deltarune universes, thus bringing magic onto their world. Nobody discovered or created a dark world before because they couldn't in a world without magic. The fact that magic only exists specifically in the dark world is also explained by this theory. Notice how in the light world we can't save, items don't heal us, Toriel cooks using a normal stove, and they have to do tests and use medical procedures to heal monsters. Meanwhile in Undertale there's plenty of magic. Toriel cooks using fire magic, there's healing magic, and items are also made out of magic and heal us instantly, and we can save and load the game. In Deltarune the only place where we can do those things is the dark world, where anyone can use magic and ordinary objects become weapons or outright gain life. In my theory, this is because the dark world is the connection between Undertale and Deltarune, so it mostly follows the same rules as the former, and thus when we leave it, there's simply no magic. While I'll admit that some of these arguments and hypotheses are more circumstantial and narrativistic, I also think that they just really make sense. It's a theory that not only explains the obvious connections between Gaster and Deltarune, but that also fits the overall narrative of the game very nicely, and also explains some of the mysteries and apparent inconsistencies in the plot, besides connecting both universes in a clear way. Toby has talked about how he started working on Deltarune even before Undertale, and considering this, plus all of the aforementioned evidence, I think it's perfectly reasonable, if not outright expected, for him to try to connect both narratives. Here's another interesting thought. Remember how in Undertale the snowed-in characters say that Sans and Papyrus just appeared one day, and Sans can't even travel through time and space? He tells us that he knows we're playing with the timelines, and talks about how he's given up on going back to some place. Plus there's that whole thing with a hidden room behind his home and a picture of people we don't know plus some strange device. Well, what if all of this is because Sans Undertale is actually Sans Deltarune? I'll admit this is mostly speculation on my part, but I think that there will be some route we can play where Sans and Papyrus end up being teleported to Undertale, and this is why there's so much mystery surrounding the skeleton brothers in the game. After that, Sans is able to teleport and knows about our resets either because being teleported to a new universe affected him in some way, or because he started meddling with Gaster's experiments, which is how he got the knowledge necessary to do those things. I mean, come on, one of his attacks is even called Gaster Blaster, so he has to be connected to the royal scientist in some way. There's a lot of things I could say about the skeleton brothers, but this video isn't about them, so let's move on. Hey, I'm adding this extra paragraph into my script at the last minute because I just wanted to say that, yes, I have been made aware of the piss and shit theory. I think the evidence for it is pretty tenuous, but ultimately if you think that this theory also lends credibility to the idea that Sans and Papyrus come from Deltarune, you're welcome to believe whatever you want. Anyways, back to the main topic. Before ending the video, I'd just like to point out that even if Gaster is the Knight, Chris probably still has two distinct personalities. That part of my theory remains unaffected, and I do still believe it's correct regardless of who is the Knight. And here's another fun speculation of mine that I just thought was too interesting to not include in the video. Remember the Muse smile audio? Doesn't it kinda sound like someone screaming? Well, what if that's exactly what it is? Gaster screaming in agony as he's scattered across time and space. Nothing says that he had to be scattered only into the future. His screams echo throughout all of time and space, past and present alike. So what do you think? Are you convinced that Gaster is the knight? Or at least that he's involved in the creation of the fountains? Or do you think my previous theory is correct and that Chris is a better candidate for the role? To be perfectly honest, I'm kind of torn between the two, but if I had to bet all my money on just one, I'd pick Gaster. Do you lean more one way or the other? Or do you think I got it all wrong? Let me know in the comments. Also, just a reminder, my channel is mainly about politics. I do intend on talking about games in some future videos, but if politics is not your thing, then maybe my channel just isn't the best for you. But if you are curious about my political views, here's a video of mine that YouTube thinks you should watch, and here's my previous theory talking about Chris in case you missed it. See ya!